What would have happened if Alexander the Great had lived longer? In the summer of 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon at only 32 years old, having conquered more territory than any man before him. His empire stretched from the mountains of Greece to the deserts of Egypt, across Persia, and into the valleys of India. Yet, despite his incredible achievements, Alexander's death came at the very moment he was planning new campaigns. His empire was young, his ambitions far from complete. To imagine a world where Alexander lived another 20 or 30 years is not fantasy. It is a question that historians have asked for centuries. The surviving records of ancient writers give us glimpses of what he was preparing, and if those plans had unfolded, the shape of our world today could look very different. When Alexander died, shipbuilders in Babylon were already constructing a fleet of 1,000 vessels. Their purpose was not trade or ceremony, but conquest. Alexander had ordered an invasion of Arabia. Ancient historians such as Arrian and Diodorus describe this plan in detail. Arabia was not just a distant land to him. It was the gateway to maritime routes that connected India, Africa, and the Mediterranean. Had he lived even a few more years, Arabia would almost certainly have fallen under his control. This much is nearly certain, because the preparations were already complete. But Alexander's ambitions did not stop at Arabia. Later writers, including Plutarch, preserved traditions that he dreamed of pushing westward, across the Mediterranean. His eyes may have turned to Carthage, the naval power of North Africa. At that time, Rome was still a small republic, decades away from becoming an empire. If Alexander had brought his armies into the western Mediterranean, the history of Rome might have ended before it truly began. Some ancient historians even speculated that Rome would have had no chance against him. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BCE, suggested that Rome's rise depended in part on Alexander's death. Without it, the Romans may have remained a local Italian power, while the Mediterranean became fully Greek. To the east, Alexander had already reached the Indus River. In his lifetime, he pushed his troops further than any Greek had ever gone. And yet, according to Arrian, he often spoke of the ends of the world and the great ocean that lay beyond. His soldiers eventually refused to march further, exhausted by years of campaigning. But Alexander himself never lost the desire. If he had lived longer, it is possible he would have returned east with fresh armies, seeking to press into Central Asia, perhaps even toward the distant civilizations of China. Later Chinese records from the Han Dynasty mention Western peoples who bore striking similarities to Greek settlers. Though contact was delayed by centuries, Alexander's vision might have opened the Silk Road long before it became famous. The empire he left behind fractured almost immediately. His generals, the Diadochi, divided the lands into separate kingdoms. This fragmentation was inevitable in the absence of a strong ruler. But had Alexander lived, things might have been different. He had already begun efforts to unify his empire in ways no conqueror before him had attempted. In the city of Susa, he organized mass marriages between Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen, hoping to fuse the cultures of East and West. He dressed in Persian robes at times, adopted elements of their court rituals, and encouraged his soldiers to see themselves not just as Macedonians, but as rulers of a new blended world. If he had lived longer, he might have had time to train an heir, or at least secure loyalty through this program of cultural integration. The result could have been a stable superempire, stretching across 3 continents. Even in his short life, Alexander left behind the seeds of what became the Hellenistic Age. Greek language and culture spread rapidly, mixing with the traditions of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India. Cities named Alexandria sprang up across the empire, serving as centers of trade, art, and science. Perhaps the most famous was Alexandria in Egypt, where the great library was established by his general Ptolemy. If Alexander had lived, this cultural flowering would only have accelerated. We can already see the evidence in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, where Greek coins and statues from his time have been discovered. In later centuries, Greek artistic styles even shaped depictions of the Buddha in the Gandhara region. These traces show that Alexander's empire was more than military. It was a bridge between civilizations. A longer reign could have pushed this cultural fusion far deeper into Asia and Africa. Religion, too, might have been transformed. Alexander was declared the son of the god Amun in Egypt, and in Persia he embraced local divine traditions. His respect for Eastern beliefs suggests that he was building toward a religious synthesis, a world where Greek philosophy and Eastern spirituality met under one imperial framework. We know from later history that Buddhism spread under rulers who had inherited Alexander's territories in India. The blending of ideas that followed, the Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara, for example, offers us a glimpse of what a longer life for Alexander might have accomplished on a far greater scale. But even with these possibilities, we must recognize the challenges. Ancient empires were fragile, communication was slow, rebellions frequent, and the loyalty of distant provinces uncertain. Alexander's own troops mutinied when he demanded too much of them. His generals were ambitious and restless. Holding together such a vast empire for decades would have tested any leader, even one as brilliant as Alexander. It is possible that despite his vision, the empire would have fractured eventually. Yet it is equally possible that his presence could have delayed that collapse long enough to change the entire course of history. Imagine a Mediterranean without Rome, an Arabia absorbed into a Greek empire, a Silk Road opened centuries earlier, and a scientific tradition fueled by a library that gathered knowledge from China, India, and the West under one roof. The world might have seen a kind of early globalization, centuries before the modern era. The technologies that emerged in the Hellenistic period, mathematics, astronomy, even early machines, could have advanced much sooner. Some historians argue that under stable conditions, the scientific revolution might have arrived 1,000 years earlier. When Alexander died in Babylon, he left behind no clear successor. His empire splintered, but his legend endured. We know from the ancient sources that he had plans for Arabia, for Africa, perhaps even beyond. These were not myths, but real strategies, interrupted only by his sudden death. That is why imagining a longer life for Alexander is more than speculation. It is a way of seeing how close the world came to an entirely different future. The story of Alexander the Great is one of unfinished ambition. He conquered more by 32 than most empires achieved in centuries, and he was only just beginning. If he had lived longer, history itself might have been rewritten. His empire could have changed the fate of Rome, accelerated contact with Asia, and reshaped culture, science, and religion across continents. The shadow of Alexander's short life still stretches across the centuries. And when we ask what might have been if he had lived longer, we are really asking how different our world today could have been.